When it comes to Ouija boards, most people treat them with distrust. Some consider it a toy for teenagers, others, a dangerous portal to the world of otherworldly forces. Personally, I was always a skeptic until I found myself in a situation that changed everything. My story may make you look at the Ouija board differently. It was an evening that started as an ordinary game and ended with something I will never be able to forget. My friends Mark, Sarah, and Tom and I decided to gather at my house. That evening, the weather was not conducive to walking. A storm was raging outside the window, and the only option was to spend time indoors. We had different ideas on how to have fun, but someone suggested a Ouija board. At first, I treated it as a joke, and none of us seriously thought that it could lead to something bad. After all, it was just a board with letters. We were all rational people, or so we thought. Mark brought the board from his old storage room, where, according to him, it had been gathering dust for years. He didn't even remember where he got it from. An ordinary wooden board with carved letters and numbers, and a small triangle pointer. At first glance, it is an unremarkable object. We do not know its purpose. We placed candles around the room for the entourage and sat around the table. The storm outside was intensifying, and this gave our evening the right atmosphere. "Let's just try it," Sarah suggested, trying not to show that she was a little uncomfortable. We put our fingers on the pointer and, laughing, began to ask simple questions. At first, nothing happened. Pointer did not move. Mark made a joking face and asked loudly, "Is there anyone with us?" At that moment, something strange happened. Pointer moved slightly. We looked at each other, thinking that one of us was joking, and pushed him on purpose. But no one confessed. We decided to continue. "Who are you?" Sarah asked with a note of nervousness in her voice. Pointer moved slowly and stopped at the letter D. We all froze. Then he continued moving, and a minute later the word Daniel lined up in front of us. We all sat in silence. It didn't seem like a joke anymore. The room felt uncomfortable, as if the air had become heavier. "Who is Daniel?" Tom asked. The answer came immediately. "Murder." That word sent a momentary chill down the back of all of us. One of us suggested stopping, but Mark insisted on continuing. He was sure it was just a coincidence, and one of us was pushing the pointer anyway. "How were you killed?" he asked. Pointer moved slowly across the board, and the following phrase lined up in front of us: "Strangled." At that moment, it became really creepy. We didn't know what to do next. It was like some kind of nightmare, but each of us felt that what was happening was real. There was no more laughter. After that phrase, something changed on the board. We weren't having fun anymore. We didn't want to laugh. The tension in the room was becoming palpable. We sat staring at the sign, as if hoping it was just a stupid prank. But no one admitted to moving him. "I think it's time for us to stop," Sarah said, and there was more confidence in her voice than any of us. "No, we're just getting started," Mark said. "Maybe we're close to something we don't understand. It could be an accident. Let's ask something else." His determination was not reassuring. It was getting harder by the minute not to think that we might have made a mistake. But Mark insisted. We put our fingers on the pointer again, not wanting to admit that we were afraid. "Daniel, what do you want?" Mark asked. Pointer did not move for several long seconds. We already thought it was someone's joke, but suddenly he moved. Slowly, very slowly, Pointer moved across the board and lined up the words, "I'm waiting." My heart started beating faster. We didn't know what to do. It all seemed like a joke until these two words appeared on the board. "Waiting for what?" Sarah whispered. This time, the answer was not so clear. Pointer moved erratically, jumping from letter to letter, not making sense. Everything seemed incoherent, as if something was preventing us from giving an answer. At that moment, I felt a sharp chill, as if a window had suddenly been opened, but all the windows were closed. "I don't want to do this anymore," Tom said sharply and took his hand off the pointer. He was clearly worried. Sarah and I took our hands off too, but Mark stayed. He was looking at the board with a kind of morbid curiosity, as if he was waiting for something important to be revealed. "Mark, that's enough," I said. "This is too much." But he wasn't listening. At that moment, new letters began to appear on the board. Slowly, reluctantly, as if the board resisted it, the letters lined up in one simple word: "Home." Mark raised his head and looked at us. "The house?" he asked, as if he didn't understand. At that moment there was a knock. Loud, heavy, as if someone had knocked on the door. We all started. "Who is this?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. No one wanted to go to open it. We froze, looking at each other. There was a storm raging outside the window, so it's unlikely that anyone could just come to visit us. But the knock was repeated. Mark got up and went to the door. The others and I sat in place, trying to figure out what was going on. "Who's there?" Mark asked, going to the door but not opening it. There was no answer, just another knock. He slowly opened the door, and for a moment I thought there was no one there. But then Mark looked down. There was a bundle on the doorstep, old and dirty, as if it had just been pulled out of the ground. Mark carefully picked up the package, and I noticed how his hands were shaking a little. It seemed that something inside him understood that, whatever it was, nothing good was waiting for us. Sarah and I exchanged glances, and Tom just sat motionless, trying not to look at what Mark was holding in his hand. "Maybe you shouldn't touch it?" I managed, unable to hide the alarm in my voice. But Mark was determined. He slowly unwrapped the film, which was wet, as if it had been kept in the rain or in some damp place for a long time. Inside the bundle was an old object, something like a small wooden box on which incomprehensible clippings and symbols were visible. The box looked ancient, as if it had been made many years ago. "This is some kind of nonsense," Tom muttered, jumping to his feet. "I'm not going to take it anymore. We're sitting here like idiots and playing some childish games. Enough." He was on the verge of panic, and I understood him. We were all close to just running away from this house. Mark didn't give up. He opened the drawer. There was another bundle inside, this time something that looked like old, badly worn clothes. Mark unfolded it, and a piece of paper fell out. There were only 2 words written on it: "Come to the lower floor." We all froze. It was like an order. Not a request, not a warning, but an order. I felt a chill go down my back, as if someone had touched me with an icy hand. "Are any of you joking?" I asked, but no one answered. We all knew it wasn't a joke. "We're not going," Sarah said, her voice sounding nervous but determined. "No, we'll go," Mark replied firmly. He was too stubborn to stop. His eyes were burning with a strange curiosity, as if he was looking for a clue to something important. "There is something here, and I want to understand what it is." Tom rolled his eyes and, clearly displeased, began to pack up to leave. But as soon as he reached the door, there was a loud sound, as if something heavy hit the floor below us. It was a low, dull rumble that came from the lower floor. "Did you hear that?" Tom asked, and his face paled. "It could have been the wind," Sarah suggested, although no one believed her. We all stood there, hesitating to take the first step. Mark, however, was the only one who was not going to back down. He headed for the stairs, and despite internal protests, we followed him. With each step down, the air became heavier, as if the house itself wanted to stop us. When we went down to the basement, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Heavy, musty, as if something had been rotting here for many years. The walls of the basement were covered with mold, and a barely flickering light bulb barely illuminated the space. "What is this place?" Tom muttered, looking around. The basement was large, with a low ceiling and old shelves filled with boxes and junk. But in the farthest corner, we noticed something strange. There was a big old door, covered with dirt and rust. I don't remember seeing her before. "That door wasn't here," Mark said, his voice sounding worried even though he was trying to hide it. He came closer and pulled the handle. The door was heavy, but it gave way. Behind it, there was a narrow passage leading down, as if there were steps going deep underground. There was a strange hum coming from there. Faint, barely audible, but alarming. "I'm not going there," Sarah said firmly, stepping back. But Mark had already started to descend, without waiting for our consent. His determination was frightening, but despite all that, we followed him. I couldn't explain it, maybe because I was afraid, or because I didn't want to be alone upstairs. When we descended, the air became even denser, as if there had not been a single living person here for a long time. The walls looked old and cracked, and in the corner of the room, there was an old iron cabinet, rusty and dusty. Everything around us looked as if the place had been abandoned many years ago. "What kind of basement is this?" I asked. How did we not notice him before? "It's not just a basement," Mark said quietly, moving closer to the closet. He pulled on the door and it creaked open. There were old, torn things inside, as if someone had thrown them here and never returned. But it wasn't the closet that attracted everyone's attention, but the sound. A barely audible, faint, but terribly intrusive sound. A quiet moan coming from somewhere in the depths of the room. "Who is this?" said in a trembling voice. The sound intensified, turning into a slow, high-pitched howl. It wasn't just the sound of the wind or the house. He was too alive, too frightening. At that moment, I felt something touch my hand, something cold, wet. I screamed, stepping back and turned around, but there was no one behind me. "We need to leave," Dara shouted, her face as white as chalk. "This place, it's not normal." Mark was still standing in front of the closet as if he was hypnotized, but then he slowly turned to us, his eyes filled with horror. Mark was standing by the closet, his eyes wide open, as if he saw something we couldn't see. His shoulders hunched and his breathing became ragged. I tried to understand what was going on, but I couldn't take my eyes off his face. It became somehow empty, as if all thoughts, emotions, even the very meaning of life had left him. "Mark?" Sarah's voice was filled with despair, but he didn't react. He just turned slowly in our direction, and I noticed how his hands were shaking. It was like a nightmare, where you don't fully understand what's going on, but the inner fear is growing every moment. "Let's go, Mark, right now," I said, trying to take control of the situation. My voice sounded strained, even though I was trying to hold on. "There's something here," he finally spoke, looking through us as if we didn't exist. "Something's been here all this time." Mark's words hung in the air like a warning, and it seemed to me that the walls of the basement had become closer. Closer. Sarah approached him, trying to touch his hand. He abruptly pulled away, as if her touch burned. "Please, let's go," Sarah screamed, her voice breaking into hysteria. She was trying to keep her composure, but I could see that she was about to snap. At that moment, the light bulb above us flickered and went out, leaving us in total darkness. We stood in absolute silence, feeling the darkness fall heavily on us. Then a sudden crash. Something fell or hit the wall. I heard footsteps, heavy, uneven, as if someone or something was slowly moving in our direction. But it was dark, and I could see nothing but endless darkness. "What is it?" Tom whispered, his voice sounding like it was from another world. We froze. In this absolute silence, the footsteps were getting closer. I could feel the air around me getting colder, almost icy. Suddenly turned around and ran, but in the dark he stumbled and fell to the floor with a thud. I heard his cry of pain, but I didn't see where he fell. "Tom," Sarah screamed, rushing to help, but at that moment something incredibly fast and quietly darted past us. I felt a whiff of wind as this something passed by me, but I didn't have time to react. Everything was happening too fast, as if we were surrounded by invisible forces playing with us like toys. "Mark," I shouted, but he continued to stand by the closet, not moving. His face was a frozen mask, as if he couldn't perceive reality. There was another crash. The walls of the basement shook, and I heard furniture falling somewhere upstairs. Something was happening inside this place. The house seemed to come to life, and it wanted to swallow us whole. I quickly rushed to Mark and, grabbing his arm, abruptly pulled him away from the closet. "Let's get out of here." Immediately, I felt my muscles tense up and my breathing became erratic. We ran up the stairs, stumbling at every step, barely seeing the way ahead. Hobbled behind, his steps heavy, limping from the fall. Sarah rushed forward, opening the way. But when we got to the basement door, it slammed in front of us with such force that the roar resounded throughout the house. Damn it. Tried my best to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. In a panic, Sarah started hitting her with her fists, shouting that we had to get out. There were footsteps behind us, slow and confident, as if someone was following us, and I could feel cold sweat running down my back. "Mark, help me," I shouted, looking back at him. But Mark stood there as if nothing was happening, his gaze empty, devoid of any life. He didn't react to anything that was happening around him. "Mark, damn it." Sarah was on the verge of hysteria. She pulled on the door handle again and again. The door remained closed, as if some invisible force was holding it. At that moment, I heard Tom groan. He fell to his knees, clutching his leg, and his face contorted in pain. I rushed to him, trying to figure out what had happened to him. His leg looked strange, as if something had twisted it at an unnatural angle. It didn't look like a normal injury. His bones looked like they had been broken. It didn't move. "We need to get out," I said quietly, feeling panic creep up on me. I started looking around for something with which to smash the door, but immediately noticed that Mark was slowly turning towards us. His movements were mechanical, as if he was controlled by someone or something from the outside. "He's not on his own," Sarah whispered, looking at Mark in horror. Tom groaned even louder, and I realized that if we didn't get out right now, we could stay here forever. I quickly looked around and noticed an old shovel lying in the corner of the basement. Grabbing her, I hit the door hard. First blow left only a dent, but I kept hitting, despite the growing pain in my arms. Sarah helped me by pushing the door with her whole body. When the door finally gave way, I climbed out of the basement, as if from the mouth of some kind of animal. It was already dark outside, and the cold wind cut my face. I turned around, hoping that Mark and Tom were following us. When I saw them, my heart stopped. Mark stood in the basement doorway, looking at us with a completely blank stare, as if he was no longer human. Tom, who had fallen on the threshold, was in an unnatural position. His eyes were wide open, but they could no longer see anything. His body was twitching convulsively, as if something was breaking him from the inside. "Let's run!" Sarah screamed, and we rushed to the car. Everything that happened after that was like a blur. We got out of the house, leaving it and everything connected with it behind. Mark and Tom stayed there, absorbed in the place. We couldn't figure out exactly what had happened, but I was sure it wasn't just paranormal phenomena. Something real that could destroy life and body. It's been a few weeks since we left home. No one else saw Mark. Tom died, and his body was found in the ruins of an old house. When I returned there with the police, the basement no longer existed. It was as if it had been wiped off the face of the earth. All the evidence of the horror that we experienced has disappeared. Only fear remained. The fear that someday, something will come for us again. Now I live in another city and avoid any mention of this house. I never tell anyone what really happened because no one will believe it. But every night, when I fall asleep, I hear those very footsteps. The footsteps that keep following me, even if I never go back to that damn house again.